Expectations breed disappointments. One thing I've noticed about debuts, especially in the last couple of years, the most beloved and long-lived debuts are the ones that seem to come out of nowhere. We've seen it with Everglow, we've seen it with Stayc, and even more recently with Newjeans. You hype up a debut too much, and people are disappointed when it wasn't exactly what they were expecting. But you keep a bit of mystery about it, and as long as you don't do a full 180 on the day of the true release, people are more than likely to like it as long as it's at least a decent song. Which is why it really shocked me when everyone started nagging on how Newjeans debuted without any true promotions beforehand. And I do get it, groups from big companies especially like to tease their new artists a bit before they debut. It's practically standard practice by this point, but I'd argue their debut was as successful as it was because of the way it was handled. Think about it. Newjeans' music isn't something we've never seen before. On the contrary, it thrives because it is something we've seen before. Whether you were around when the Y2K sound was around or not, you've heard songs from that time, watched movies, consumed media. I wasn't around in the 80s, but I know what 80s music sounds like and what 80s media looks like. If you were to promote a group off that alone, people would be tired of the concept before it was ever even released, unless they just specifically loved the Y2K sound, but in that case they would have to change their marketing strategies to compel to a certain niche. Not that that can't work, it's just a bit of a longer process. The point is, if a group were to debut with a specific sound or style that didn't satisfy a bunch of people all at once, people that aren't a fan of that sort of sound or style aren't likely to give that group a chance, and people that are a fan of that sound or style are likely to be disappointed when the song comes out and it wasn't exactly what they were expecting. You give people a bone and plenty of time to overanalyze, and they're likely to do just that. Compare and contrast too much, and you just ruined a perfectly good debut because you gave too much away. Now, I still think Newjeans' success was a product of good timing and placement. Hybe easily has the greatest and probably most positive influence on the scene right now as a company. Obviously, if another company had done this, it probably wouldn't have worked out the same way, but I don't think it's something that they could have pulled off before, and I don't think it's something they'll try to pull off in the future as well. The last debut from Hybe that I think was as beloved as Newjeans and has had quite a bit of longevity is TXT. They were the first group to debut from this label in years, not to mention they were the quote-unquote little brothers of the biggest boy group in the world. I know it's a bit overdone to say this, but they could have wiped their asses with that CD and sold it and still made as much money as they did. They would have been fools not to promote TXT in the way they did, and I think a lot of big companies get caught up in this thinking. Take Nmixx for example. I'm sure we all remember when pre-orders for their album was opened a year before their debut, knowing little to nothing about the group at the time, and most of the things we did know was speculation. I'm not even sure we knew the group's name at the time, let alone who would be in it, but because they're JYP and people expect that name to carry them, they thought they could get away with it. It's not the worst idea I've ever seen coming from a company. I'm sure it garnered them a quick buck, but if I'm pre-ordering an album a year before its release, I better be hearing Liquid Pop Gold on that album. If Nmixx had been a more digestible group, I don't think this would have panned out as badly as it did, but honestly, I think we all saw this coming from a mile away. JYP artists have never really had a distinctive sound running through them all. I already know what to expect from YG's new girl group, or SM's new boy group, or God forbid NCT Part 10. And if I was a fan of those sounds, I could see myself being excited a year before their debut, but when it comes to a group like Nmixx, there's just no telling what's going to come out of them. And I think JYP has finally realized this. All of their active groups have very distinctive sounds, and not everybody's going to like them. Stray Kids basically made noise music a trend. Itzy's music sounds nothing like anything we've ever heard before them, and while Nmixx is obviously playing on some well-known ideas, there's no doubt that there's something unique there. It took Itzy losing their favor and Stray Kids finally gaining some for JYP to realize there's a real market when promoting to a niche. I feel like we saw it a bit with Extraordinary Heroes' debut, but I'm almost sure when their next group debuts, we'll see them appealing to a certain sound or style and try to build up an audience that way. And that's all well and good for bigger companies that are going to have that attention on them, but what about some of the small fries? What do? I think the best example of this that I can think of right now is what KQ has been doing with their rookies. Ateez is without a doubt a big enough group to be excited to see someone finally debut under them, but I'm not sure KQ is a big enough company to really hype up a new group all on their own. Even the handful of familiar faces in the group we haven't seen in years. They're basically starting from the ground up. Their strategy in some places is unsurprisingly similar to Ateez's. Throwing a couple of performances out here and there, hyping up their debut with some pretty big content, and even throwing out a few songs of their own to give people a taste of what's to come. Unlike their seniors though, with KQ's new influence in the industry, these boys have been able to promote outside of their company as well, performing with already established groups, participating on broadcasts, and even being the opening act for Ateez once or twice at their concerts. The idea behind this is to build up a fan base before the group officially debuts, introducing them through other artists and also allowing them to do their own thing as well. Considering they already have some pre-debut music out, I doubt people will be that disappointed with their debut either, since there's already a tangible idea of what it will sound like. Obviously, nothing is set in stone yet, but I'd like to think that these boys have a really good chance considering they already have a presence in the industry. Limelight is another great example of how to promote a pre-debut group, without the influence of a large company or even a popular senior group to help them out. They may not be the most anticipated debut of 2023, but they do already have a bit of buzz around them, mostly just because some of the members have participated on survival shows, and their company has expressed that they wish to keep the group's numbers expanding, hinting at the fact that they might add Geso and maybe even Machio from Kepler into the lineup after their contract is done. They've already released a pre-debut album that has many, including myself, anticipating their debut later this month, but not only was the music just a good listen, a lot of effort was put into it. With 2 high-quality music videos, performance videos, special clips, and live clips of pretty much all of the songs on the album, I don't think I would be going too far in saying that more effort was put into this little pre-debut project for the girls than some full albums I've seen in the past. I can only hope their debut will live up to these expectations, but considering it's coming in just a few weeks, I won't have to wait long to see. So, I've talked a lot about how big companies manage their groups in a variety of different ways, and also a bit how small companies might try to replicate this success in their own ways to help build up their groups and fanbase slowly but surely. But what about the in-between that I mentioned before? The shockingly average promotions for groups that end up having an above-average debut that seem to come out of nowhere. I mentioned Stayc and Everglow as examples for a reason. Not only were both of their debuts very successful and have been remembered as some of the best of their time, they've also both led to very successful careers as well, and yet neither of these groups were really all that hyped up for debut. I hardly even heard of either of them until their songs officially dropped, but after that, it seemed as if they were everywhere. Honestly, I think half of it was just luck and good timing. They were really great songs that just happened to capture people's attention, but I think the other half is that their companies knew exactly the position that they were in and the position that their groups would be in when they debuted. Yuehua wasn't in an exactly favorable position. They're a large company, but Everglow was their first K-pop group that they would be managing completely on their own. Not to mention, people were already bitter at the way Unique and Cosmic Girls have been managed in the past. Yuehua knew that if they stepped in and promoted Everglow as the new Yuehua group, that it would end badly. Hell, Everglow still got shit from being from a Chinese company after a while, but since they weren't promoted that way during their debut, nobody really questioned it until they looked a bit deeper. Since they weren't able to promote them as a company group, their pre-debut promotions lacked a bit. That ended up being a good thing though, as no one really had any expectations for the group. They were a ticking time bomb that exploded at just the right time. Whether this was a planned event or a happy coincidence, the way Everglow's debut promotions were handled, I think really aided them in their career as a whole. Stayc, on the other hand, I think truly captured people's attention with their music alone. In the hellfire of noise and experimental music, their songs not only felt familiar, but also played on a lot of pre-existing ideas that were popular at the time without being overdone. I do remember Stayc's pre-debut promotions a little bit more than Everglow's, but even then, it really wasn't much. People were talking about them, sure, but they weren't exactly the most anticipated debut of the time. So when their song finally dropped, it totally shocked everyone with how good and refreshing it was. It garnered them a decent bit of attention. Both these groups found the secret formula, and it has worked wonderfully for them both. Even if it's not always an attainable outcome, I'd say these debuts leave the biggest impressions. It's not so much about them coming out of nowhere as much as it was them defying expectations, which is always fun to see. Anyways, that's all for now. Thank you all so much for watching, I really hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'll see you next time, travelers.